What is it like being Yale's first Black student body president? Today, I am so excited that we have Kahlil Greene joining us. For those of you who are new, my name is Sydney Montgomery. I'm the CEO of Montgomery Admissions Consulting, where I specialize in working with first-generation and minority college and law school applicants. And today, we have Kahlil Greene joining us to talk to you a little bit about his college application process, his time at Yale, his rise to becoming Yale's first Black student body president, and his future and kind of how he sees his platform. When Kahlil Greene was 19, he was elected the first Black student body president in Yale's 318-year history. Now he's an online educator with over 500,000 followers across his TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn platforms. At Yale, he's a history major, studying social change and social movements, and was a member of the prestigious Brady Johnson Program in Grand Strategy and a John Kerry Fellow. He has authored op-eds about education and racial equity in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Harvard Business Review. And he is also the youngest professional public speaker signed to the Washington Speakers Bureau, regularly giving speeches to schools, nonprofits, and corporations. He was also awarded an inaugural Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington Hall of Fame Award for his continued support fundraising and engaging with the youth-oriented nonprofit. Kahlil and I are actually both from Germantown, Maryland, in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I've had the pleasure of watching him grow up and see all the impact and good that he has done. Kahlil, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
Doing well. Oh my gosh, your bio and your history, the amount that you've been able to accomplish, and the fact that you just turned 21 is absolutely just impressive and really inspiring.
Of course. I mean, I'm very thankful for everyone who's helped me along the ride to get here. And I just take every accomplishment as just a step in a journey and just always trying to see what's next and see what I can do next. Things are fulfilling to me, things that will impact the world, things that I find fun.
Awesome. Why don't you, I know that I've read your bio and it's amazing, but why don't you tell us just a little bit more about yourself? Let us understand kind of who the man is behind the accolades.
Yeah, so my name is Kahlil. I guess that's pretty obvious at this point, but I'm from Germantown, Maryland, like you said, currently 21 years old. I'm really interested in racial equity and history and education as sort of like disciplines and topics generally in my life. Something that I love to do more than anything else is like writing op-eds and making arguments. And I think you'll find that sort of essence across all of the accomplishments and accolades that I have. I did a lot of advocacy and argumentation in my time as student body president. I wrote op-eds in the Washington Post, as you said, in LA Times, related to racial equity. And all of this is because ever since I was a kid, growing up in Montgomery County, which is really segregated, like through de facto segregation, I saw the differences in the funding and resources from places like my elementary, middle school, which were less than 5% white, which were very underfunded and under-resourced. But then I went to a magnet school across county that was majority white and East Asian, and I saw how many resources that school got. So I think that was my first like head-on view towards how racism and disenfranchisement and classism affects education. And from there, I just always wanted to raise awareness around this issue, better the education system, and educate people through digital means and through any other platforms I'm able to access.
Awesome. Now talk to me just a little bit about your college application process, even before you got to Yale. Could you have imagined that you would be where you are right now when you were in high school?
Definitely not at the start of high school. I had a very rough experience. So I went to a magnet high school, a STEM magnet high school specifically, and I was the only Black student in the entire program. There's out of like 240 students across 4 classes at the end of the time that I was there. And I think it was very tough. I got really bad grades when I first came in. Like I remember I got a D in the math test, and that was the first time I ever got a D. That's the first time I ever saw a D. I've seen people like either not take a test or like at least get a C on it, but it was just like really crazy and bizarre. But I think I started like really thinking about the application process around like 2015. And the first step for me was really just starting to practice SAT work and like SAT math and reading. I think back when I took it, it was split into 3 sections. The first 2 times I took it, and the second time is when they like renewed it, and it was 2 sections, just math and reading. definitely owe a lot of credit to you for helping me in that process and just like going through a few practice problems and practice tests. But I think I really just started with the SAT process. After that, I just made sure that I got my grades up. And then after I made sure I got my grades up, I just started really thinking about what narrative do I want to tell the admissions officers and where do I want to apply. And then I kind of got my story down. And then from there, the applications were just writing and answering as many questions as possible.
And I remember your application process. I remember, definitely remember the SAT, but I also remember going through some of your essays with you. And then I remember when you were interviewing and working through that. I remember one of the things that I told you that you didn't really need me to tell you is to always be yourself and always be authentic. I remember we had this conversation. You came up to Cambridge and we were talking about what the interviewer wanted to hear. And I was like, just tell them what you're interested in, tell them who you are, really showcase your personality and what you care about. And I tell you, you didn't even need me to tell you that because that's how you are as a person. But I feel like that really showed in your applications, in both your essays and your interviews.
Yeah, and I always say like you want to show yourself, but you also want to show your best self. I'd say, and you want to maximize your own story. So what you're really doing is telling a story. So you kind of want to come in with a narrative. If you did a bunch of scattered hobbies or scattered things, you want to like somehow tie them all together. If you were like really focus on one specific hobby, one specific interest outside of school and in school, then talk about that. But you want to make sure it's cohesive. I'd say, and what I always try to do is like emphasize the accomplishments and the like work and effort that I put into those things that will fit into my narrative. And I think that was something that really helped, just like honing in on your story and making sure you're telling the maximally like impactful and interesting story about yourself that you're able to muster up based on the truth and the reality of who you are.
So let's fast forward to Yale. What was that first year like? What was that adjustment, as a student from Montgomery County, Maryland, from Germantown to one of the oldest predominantly white institutions in the country? What were some of the challenges that you had, and what are things that you could tell other students as they're looking to make that adjustment?
Yeah, so luckily I did a pre-orientation program at Yale called Cultural Connections before I actually started school. And this took up the first, like the week before you officially move into Yale as a freshman. And I met a lot of other students because it's made for students of color, specifically like Black and Latinx students make up the majority, but there's like people of all races in it. So I made a lot of friends there. And I think with that strong foundation of connections and relationships with students of color, I was able to transition a lot easier than I would be if I was just dropped into Yale immediately. Though there were definitely challenges. Like you go to your first party and it's like a lot of white music you never heard and like mostly white people and like people were really getting drunk. Things I just really didn't experience in my high school specifically, or at least my magnet high school experience specifically. But from there, I mean, like Yale academically isn't super challenging in my opinion as a first year. I think it's just socially challenging because there's like you have to meet a lot of people, you have to join clubs, you have to do a lot of things outside of school that are pretty hard. But because I was really like eager to leave Maryland and like just go on this journey on my own and like be autonomous, I really did thrive off of that social environment. Whereas a lot of people were homesick or want to talk to their friends and family, they were having a harder time. So like I really just dived headfirst into a lot of different things, whether that be student government or the Black Men's Union or like this really cool coding club that I was in. But I just really made sure to like spread my wings and just like really engage with the Yale community because I personally was motivated to do so. And I think that made my first year pretty successful and a lot of fun.
So you just mentioned a lot of different clubs, the coding and the Black men's groups. What was it about student government that made you decide, I want to put even more time here? I want to really try to get involved.
Yeah, so I didn't really try to get involved with student government as a first year. I just wanted to do it to like meet people and also like it's kind of a status thing. Like if you're I ran for a Senate position, which is one of 24 things at Yale, or a first year class council position, which is 24 positions at Yale for the freshman class to throw events. And it's like, oh, like I'm an FCC member. It's automatically like sort of a status thing that you can use to like start conversations with people or meet people or have people know who you are. So I ran for that. I really wasn't super involved first year, but I think towards the end of the year, one of my friends who was an upperclassman, a sophomore, wanted to run for president and he wanted me on his campaign team. So when I joined his campaign team, I saw like the actual like the real school wide campaign, which was like one of one position, which is the student body president. And you saw like how the debates were and how people were canvassing and how like competitive it was. And I think that interested me just because it seemed like so much fun and like so much of an investment, so real. People took it so seriously, which I had never seen before in an election environment. My friend ended up losing, so I had to kind of do my own politics and politicking and get onto the executive board team of the person who won, who I previously campaigned against. But from there, I was on the executive board of her campaign, Sal, my predecessor, and I just was really successful in student government. I could talk about that, but like I was very successful as a finance director, coming off of a huge scandal that happened. I had to clean up the student government from that, and then from there, just like it was kind of a natural progression for me to become president, really.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that. You can go into what you were doing in student government before you became president, but I also really want to know what was it like for you to become president, but then specifically to know that you were the first Black person to be in that seat.
Yeah, so I'll like give a quick rundown. Basically, there was a scandal, embezzlement scandal, where members of student government used students' tuition money, which were supposed to use to allocate towards events, to buy themselves Patagonia jackets, like as a reward for their labor or something like that. And it was a huge thing. It blew up all over campus. I became finance director right after this whole scandal came out. So the first like 3 months of my time, I just built this financial accountability infrastructure where there were so many checks and balances, where everything was recorded, where all the different like processes had to go through me, the finance director. And we had a very scam-free year. But then also as finance director, I wanted to allocate the budget towards meaningful things. So I started using the money to like buy menstrual products, for example, for residential colleges, so people would have those for free. And started doing brand partnerships to raise more money for different events and different projects, policy projects that better this student life. And I think I was very successful in that regard in a way that people hadn't seen prior. So I like had a lot of favor from a lot of people. But the time I ended up running, it was an uncontested election, so I just kind of became president. And I really wanted to hone in on one specific idea during my time as president, because it's a different role from finance director. And I wanted the Yale College Council to be more responsive to student activism, which we had not been prior. Like anytime there was an activist rally or a protest on campus, student government was either nowhere to be found, or they were like sort of reporting back to the administration in a very like sort of surveillance-y, big brothery way. So that was my one big thing. And I think that really aligned with my positioning as the first Black student body president, just because my ability to even be on campus definitely came through protests and wars and all the other things that progress Black American positionality in the United States. So I thought it was only natural for me to like encourage that as student body president. And I think I was very successful. There was a huge climate change protest that happened like a few months after my election. There was a police brutality protest that happened a few days after my election because an unarmed Black woman was shot by Yale Police Department officers. And I was on the front lines for that in a lot of ways. And I was even got a shout out from Black Lives Matter in New Haven. And then later on, there's a huge student movement to get grades removed once we were kicked off of campus for the COVID-19 crisis, because some students were going home to mansions and some students were like homeless. We want to just remove grades entirely so that there wasn't a huge disparity in academic performance based off of class. And the last thing was a movement that I literally started myself called Yale Together. And we united over 80 student groups to raise over $57,000 in 1 week following the death of George Floyd to donate to racial justice organizations around the nation. So I think I was very successful. And that's 3 policy projects out of 70 that we completed. So I really wanted to make sure I was impactful and successful, and I definitely think I was. And really enjoyed my time as student body president.
What have you learned as student body president about just the amount of support schools can give Black students? What can other schools do, whether they have an endowment as large as Yale's, or maybe they're not, maybe they're a public school? What can they do to better support Black students on campus?
Yeah, I think what they can do to support Black students is kind of like support Black students supporting Black students. So, for example, Yale has something called cultural centers. They have one for I guess Afro American Cultural Center, Native American Cultural Center, Latino American Cultural Center, and Asian American Cultural Center. And the African American Cultural Center is like where a lot of the student groups relate to like Black culture, whether that be stepping or hip hop dancing or like a cappella, like R&B and soul a cappella. Like a lot of groups like that met up, and I definitely used the Afro American Cultural Center to like meet a lot of people. It was a huge part of my first year because I was a member of the Black Men's Union and later became a board member for that. And that's where I met a lot of mentors and other people. So I think just having that space where Black students can like freely meet was very impactful for me. And I think outside of that, like Yale doesn't do any really specific things to support Black students, I'd say. So it's hard for me to like think and ideate. And I'm the type of person that doesn't look towards an institution like Yale to provide things, though I think they should. I just like personally, it's not how I feel supported. Like when Yale does like a belonging or D&I initiative. So I think just as long as they like support and keep funding the Afro American Cultural Center and other schools kind of like either fund or foster similar spaces on their campus and like have programs like cultural connections where we all get to meet each other, I think that's what's most helpful in my opinion.
That is really good. I mean, I love what you said about schools should support Black students supporting each other. Now, you know, I'm one of the co-founders of College Equity First, and we have put out the College Equity Index. The College Equity Index creates an alphanumeric rating that has ranked 105 of the top private schools on campus culture and environment for Black students. We use affordability, accessibility data, also outcomes, but social climate. What are some of the things that students should be looking at as they are trying to decide, is this a good school for me? I remember when you were deciding between schools, we actually had that conversation about what school is going to be a better environment for you as a Black student. And that's sort of what the College Equity Index is trying to help students do. And we actually have a campus climate survey that we're sending out to Black student unions across the country at all of these schools to get that firsthand experience from Black students on how their experiences are on campus to help other students. But kind of thinking back to when you made the decision to go to Yale, and then also thinking about what you know now as you're ending your time at Yale, what are some of those things that Black students should be looking at when they're trying to decide what place to spend the next 4 years of their life?
I really think it just comes down to talking to like either the Black students or just everyone at a campus and filling it out. Because my dream school was MIT for a long time, and I ended up getting in. But I also got into Yale, and I visited MIT, and like my whole life, I was like, oh, MIT is amazing. I want to go to MIT, MIT, MIT. When I visited, but honestly, like the social life on campus seemed very overall underwhelming. A lot of the people that I met, which were not selling the school very well, and they were like not my vibe of people. And I visited some place on campus called Chocolate City, which is supposed to be like the sort of like Black space for at least Black men in terms of a dormitory. And I visited, and they weren't like super engaging. They didn't seem like they were very lively. It seemed kind of exclusive to like they said that they go through applications and pick people. It just wasn't the vibe. When I visited Yale, like the Afro American Culture Center is open to everybody. All the people that I met were super bubbly, super social. You could tell those kids like had really strong social skills and like wanted to meet people. And I think that vibe deep down, even though I thought I wanted to like study engineering and MIT is unrivaled, and Yale, if anything, is like kind of bad in that regard. Like the vibe that I felt from talking to people was just so strong when I came to Yale. And I don't look back like not even a little bit, like not even the slightest bit. So I think that sort of data set of information of like interviews and talking to people and filling out the vibe is just so important. I think there's nothing that really beats that or matches that.
What are some of those questions that students can ask when they are trying to talk to people? You know, how do they get in contact with the Black student unions? Are there red flags? Like you mentioned, some of them didn't seem engaged, but what are really those questions that they should be focused on?
Yeah, I would be like, I think inclusivity is a big one. So like, how inclusive is the Black community here, or like how inclusive is just like the school generally, socially wise? Um, what like how engaged is the community? So like, is the Black student union something where all the Black students show up and like everyone's there? Is there like two people struggling to get anyone to come?
Yeah.
I'd ask like what I guess I don't know explain this, but like what is a sort of culture of Blackness there?
Mhm.
Um,
Because sometimes it
because
can be toxic.
it can be toxic, and I like met like there's that aspect of like the cult, like the health of the community, but I think like also just generally like the actual community itself, like in terms of ethnicity. I think there's like a lot of cultural differences. So like Yale, for example, is a place where you won't find a lot of African Americans, and majority of the Black community, at least from my perspective, seem to be like West African descendant, or and there's a small Caribbean population. So I think like the culture is actually like something that's unique to every school, and like the blends of culture and the are very different. And then I think also just like Yeah, I guess like how like I think engagement's probably a big one because it's like there could be a lot of black people in theory in a school, but if none of the black people hang around black people, and that's like a very different experience. And like even if there's a small black community, but they're all close together, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And those are some of the questions we do have on that campus climate survey, because even what you just said about the racial and ethnic breakdown of who is in the Black Student Union, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily know that. Or if you're a high schooler, I work with ninth through 12th grade students. So, of course, if you're in the ninth grade, you
Hmm.
might not think to ask that. You might just assume, oh, it's Black Student Union. Everyone's just like me. But in fact, it could be so many different kinds of people.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's also really interesting what you mentioned. I had forgotten that you wanted to be an engineer. Um, and that was like really your focus for such a long period of time. But now you're a history major. And what I love about the fact that you're a history major is that I feel like people write that off. Like what are you doing with a history major? But I think the way that you have really used your platform and used your degree and also used just what you've learned, but also taken what you've experienced and your own kind of like the school of life to shape how you can become a powerful thought leader with a history major. I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah, this is an un-PC term, but I think I'm like a humanities supremacist now. Like I think the humanities are just so important, and like I just don't even look back. Like I just like don't understand why everyone wanted to do STEM.
I mean, I'm an
But
English
really,
major, so I won't disagree with
yeah, I'm
you.
sure you agree with me. But like I was remember this one time I was like I came into Yale even as a CS major. There was one time I was doing this long P set, and I like looked out my window, which overlooked the courtyard of the like residential dormitory building that I was like staying at, and it's like a nice small building with a strong community. And I saw all the first years out there like playing soccer and like getting to know each other and like having fun. And I was like,
You were
why
sad.
do I want to spend the next 4 years like stuck in my room? No, absolutely not. So
Yeah.
I just like change over the time, became history. I think history is so fun and engages your creativity. You learn how to like explain yourself and argue and talk to people, and those skills are so applicable in everyday life, unlike maybe coding skills, which might be applicable in a professional environment.
Mhm.
But when you meet someone and you're like out for drinks, like you don't apply that specifically. So I just found that humanities have just like honestly like made my life brighter and like more vibrant just because
Yeah.
I'm seeing things from different ways, and like my creative side of my brain is engaged so much more often. So I definitely don't look back. So I think that's also something people might want to consider. Like, do you actually want to do the thing that you're applying to college
Yeah.
to do, or like are your passions more widespread and comprehensive, or maybe even entirely different, and like there's external pressures forcing you or like encouraging you to do something you actually don't want to in terms of
Yeah.
academics.
Absolutely. I mean, I tell students all the time, you are likely to change your major. I think it's almost 50% of first year students across the country do. And so when you think about that, you need to go to a school that is going to be good at a variety of things, is going to really serve you as a whole person. Because if you pick a
Hmm.
school because they're good at kinesiology and then you decide you
Hmm.
don't want to do kinesiology, I mean, I went as a psych major, which I have no idea. I'm allergic to science. I have no idea why I thought that would be a good idea. But
Hmm.
I never thought I'd be an English major. But, if you go into a school thinking I'm going to do this one thing and all their other programs aren't strong, you're kind of still stuck there. And that's when we see that transfer rate.
Yeah, yeah. Luckily, I Yale's liberal arts, so like it's decent enough at everything. I think engineering is pretty bad at. Other than that, it's like decent enough for me to like switch around and still be like at the top program for whatever I wanted to be. So like whether that be econ, poli sci, or history.
Absolutely. I want to pivot towards the end here. I want to focus on where you're going. I want you to tell us a little bit about your career path right now. You've become a paid speaker, one of the youngest at the Washington Speakers Bureau. You're a social media influencer. You have over 500,000 followers across all of your social media. You're really pushing the envelope in terms of teaching African American history and calling out injustices. What inspired this? How did you get on this journey? And how has it been so far?
Yeah, so I mean, I do this in school. I'm a history major, so really it was just like over quarantine. I got into TikTok, which I think a lot of people did as well. I took a time off from Yale just because I didn't want to be in school during COVID and like have to be online school. And I just found a small passion in making videos with like these mini arguments about history and social commentary and Black culture. And they really just took off. I think there was a huge appetite for that sort of content coming off of the summer of George Floyd's killing and all the other things that happened last year. So I really blew up. My first video on MLK and how he's whitewashed got over 1 million views on TikTok alone. And then I grew from there. Started using more Instagram, other things. I also do public speaking, which I actually had earlier than TikTok, but really blew up once the TikTok blew up. Mainly in the beginning was over like Yale's first Black student body president, talking about politics and education. But now I'm known as the Gen Z TikTok or the Gen Z historian on TikTok, and I talk about those sorts of things as well as merging my old experience. And I think the New York Times actually covered my work in a way that really merges both of those, and it was entitled "A Yale Student That Makes and Teaches Black History." I think that's a really comprehensive way of putting it. So that's where I want to continue to be. I had a consulting job at McKinsey and recently turned it down just because I realized once again it's not something I actually wanted to do more than it was something that I felt like I was externally pressured to do. So once I graduate, I'll just be like continuing content creation, maybe moving out to LA or something, but just trying to be happy and do something that I love because I think life is too short to like waste away in a corporate job when I don't need to do it.
I really applaud you for kind of not boxing yourself in. I know that, I went to Princeton, and of course I went to Harvard Law School, and I think that similarly when you go to Yale or any other high achieving school, or honestly, even if you're just the first in your family to go to any school, you can feel that pressure to have to stay in a certain lane, or oh, you made it, so do the traditional job that's expected of you. But I know both of us feel very similarly in that we are kind of made for a little bit more than just the confines of the box. And I think that there's a lot of power in forging your own path. What are some pieces of advice that you have for students? Maybe they're teenagers still in high school, maybe they're college students, maybe they're in law school or graduate school, about kind of building your own personal brand, having a voice, having a platform, and impacting others?
I think it's important to have social media. So like create an Instagram. If you want to create a TikTok, TikTok's a little bit more toxic. So it's up to you if you want to risk your mental health. But Instagram's nice. Twitter's usually nice. LinkedIn, of course, is a necessity in this day and age with networking. But I'd say like post more, like talk about things you care about with a larger audience. Try to cultivate communities, whether that be like on something like Reddit, even is another big one where there's like online communities that talk about all types of things from movies to politics. But I think like start engaging your ideas on a public platform instead of like privately and in small conversations. And I think once you start doing that, you'll start forming better ideas. Once you start forming better ideas, you'll start having something to offer people. And I think that's what at the end of the day everyone's looking for, and like why influencer status is so huge. Because whether it be comedy or art or commentary or historical research, like there's so many things out there that can be monetized and made into like bite-sized form for people to consume. And I think people are really, really eager to do that because social media is a platform that a lot of things can take off on. You can sell clothes on it, you can sell services on it, you can sell advice on it. And I think from just how versatile the platform is, everyone can use it to their benefit and like find an audience and start communicating, cultivating their own community. So just start posting, start absorbing content, and start engaging with online communities.
That is a really interesting take on it. And I know that I will be very interested, of course, like I have your whole life, to continue to see what path you go on, and how you shape things. Actually, fun fact, Kahlil's brother, Kashan, and I actually were in the same exact grade in high school. We had a couple of classes together. So I know that I will be continuing to watch your journey as you grow, and I'm sure that others are very excited to see that. Before we end, do you have any other pieces of advice for any high school, college, or graduate students that are listening?
I'd say just really hone in on your narrative. Like this is one of the other reasons I'm a humanities supremacist because I just think humanities teaches you skills that are just so applicable in so many different areas. And I think when it comes to admissions, admissions really is storytelling. Like it's stories. Like if you read a story, if you read a short story or a long story or an op-ed, like you're getting the sort of essence of what you need to do in your application. So I think studying the humanities in any small capacity will really help you for these sorts of things where you're writing to influence a human. That's what humanities are. It's like the study of the different arts and forms of culture and communication that resonate with us as human beings. So I think if you really want to write a great essay, you have to learn how to write a story, the essence of a story, and you have to communicate yourself in a story fashion. And of course, there's versatility in that. and like where you start or where you begin or what information you convey, but just think that there's a human on the other side of your application, and that person wants to be moved. And once you move them well enough and you give them the right information, then that'll sway them towards like letting you in. Well, at least that's my perspective. I'm not as much of an expert as Sydney is, but I definitely think storytelling is a huge component of any admissions application.
I would agree with you. Storytelling is at the art of what we do, and being able to tell your authentic story is really important. And being able to cultivate your own voice, whether that's speaking or writing, I think just as a person, as a human moving through society, is one of the most powerful weapons that you have. Kahlil, of course, you have so many followers. Where can people follow you? Where can they find more information about you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Kahlil Greene, on TikTok. No, on Instagram at Kahlil.Greene, KAHLIL.GREENE, at TikTok at Kahlil Greene. And I think it's the same at Kahlil Greene on Twitter, and then LinkedIn, Kahlil Greene.
And of course, you have a website.
And I do have a website if you want to get into contact with me. That's KahlilGreene.com.
Amazing. And of course, everyone knows that they can follow me at S. Montgomery Consulting on Instagram or at _ Sydney A. Montgomery. And you can follow more about our business at smontgomeryconsulting.com. Make sure that you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, share this video with a friend, and we cannot wait to continue to follow Kahlil's journey. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.